My name is Azadeh Shahshahani with the American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia. Today, the ACLU of Georgia released a comprehensive report on conditions of detention for immigrants in Georgia, titled Prisoners of Profit, Immigrants and Detention in Georgia. The report covers the 4 immigration detention facilities in Georgia, which include the Stewart Detention Center, the North Georgia Detention Center, the Irving County Detention Center, and the Atlanta City Detention Center. 3 of the facilities are operated by corporations. The ACLU of Georgia interviewed 68 individuals who were detained in Georgia immigration detention facilities. Detainees' family members and immigration attorneys were also interviewed. The ACLU of Georgia also toured detention centers in Georgia and reviewed documents obtained from Immigration and Customs Enforcement and other governmental agencies. The report documents serious abuses in Georgia detention centers requiring immediate action. The conditions documented by the ACLU of Georgia violate the detainees' constitutional and human rights, as well as ICE standards. Findings raise serious concerns about violations of detainees' due process rights, inadequate living conditions, inadequate medical and mental health care, and abuse of power by those in charge. The report recommends that ICE stop detaining immigrants at 2 corporate-run detention centers, namely the Stewart Detention Center and the Irving County Detention Center, given the extent of the violations as well as the facilities' remote locations, which keep the detainees away from communities of support and legal representation. The report also contains specific recommendations for improving conditions of detention for immigrants at the Atlanta City Detention Center, including providing outdoor recreation to the detainees, and the North Georgia Detention Center, including paying minimum wage to the detainees who choose to enroll in the voluntary work program. Findings of this report also confirm the problems inherent to the detention of immigrants in privately run detention centers. There is deep-seated tension between profit-making aims of prison corporations and what the American values of justice and liberty demand. That is, humane conditions for those detained and releasing immigrants who pose no danger to the community or flight risk. And I would like to read one account from a detainee at the Stewart Detention Center who could not be here with us today because he has already been deported. Eduardo Zuniga suffered 2 injuries to his legs while working at the Stewart kitchen, and both injuries were undertreated. It is the Stewart's policy to issue special shoes for those detainees working with heavy objects at the kitchen. The shoes have hard toes and soles that provide better traction. The regular shoes that are issued are very smooth and soft-soled. Due to a shoe shortage, Eduardo was told that he would have to work in his regular shoes. His first injury came from a cooler dropping on his foot, which shattered his toenail. The medical staff refused to remove shards of the splintered nail from his foot. The toe became infected, and Eduardo eventually removed the shards himself. 4 months later, his toenail had still not grown back, and the swelling persisted. After making numerous complaints, he was finally able to see a doctor. Eduardo injured his knee about a month later when he slipped on water on the kitchen floor. He was not allowed to get medical help for 3 days. The nurses and medical staff called him names like crybaby and little girl. The medical staff issued him 1 crutch, despite the fact that the medical records show that he was supposed to receive 2. His armpit became bruised and blistered. He missed meals for 2 days because he had to rest his arms and could not get to the meal hall without the crutch. Now back in Mexico, Eduardo continues to experience pain in his back and is unable to walk comfortably. He has not been able to go to a doctor since he has no way of paying for it, so he still does not know the extent of the damage. The report documents serious abuses in Georgia detention centers requiring immediate action. The conditions documented by the ACLU of Georgia violate the detainees' constitutional and human rights, as well as the ICE standards. The findings of the report raise serious concerns about violations of detainees' due process rights, including inadequate living conditions, inadequate medical and mental health care, and abuse of power by those in charge. Facility due process concerns include inadequate information about available pro bono legal services, inadequate conditions for attorney visits which raise attorney-client confidentiality issues, and delays in gaining access to the law library. Medical and mental health care findings indicate that the healthcare unit lacks professional full-time staff and is short on Spanish-speaking staff, that the detainees face unreasonable delays in receiving care, and that treatment of detainees with mental disabilities is punitive rather than care-oriented. Living condition findings indicate the high price of phone services, sometimes prohibiting detainees from contacting their family members altogether, inadequate visitation policy including no contact visits for family members, numerous concerns about cell conditions including temperature extremes and overcrowding, serious concerns about the segregation unit including placement of detainees with mental health problems in segregation instead of providing treatment, hygiene concerns including instances where the facilities ran out of hygiene items and detainees simply had to go without, providing used underwear to the detainees at Erwin, food concerns including unusual meal times, insufficient quality, and poor quality of the food, and that the voluntary work program at the Stewart and the North Georgia Detention Center, where the detainees are paid $1 to $3 per day, as well as limited recreation. Lastly, abuse of power findings point to a failed grievance procedure where detainees who had filed grievances did not receive responses, verbal and physical abuse, and retaliatory behavior from the guards, including placing detainees in segregation. So we have already shared copies of the report with ICE and with the Department of Homeland Security, Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Office. Our two main recommendations are for the two facilities, the Stewart Detention Center and for the Irving County Detention Center, to close. That is for ICE to stop detaining immigrants at those two facilities because of the extent of the violations that we have documented, and also because of their distance to families and communities of support and legal representation. And we also have specific recommendations for improving conditions of detention at the other two facilities. Any questions?
Kind of give us a nutshell. Who are these detainees that are experiencing these conditions?
There are various reasons why people end up in detention. People could have entered with authorization, but then their visa may have expired, and so that is the reason why people could end up in detention, or people could be seeking asylum and end up in detention, or people could be subject to deportation but are fighting their cases because they claim that they would be subject to torture if they go back to their countries of origin, or they have some other reason for staying here. And so while their case is pending, ICE detains them in Georgia in immigration detention centers.
Talk with me a little bit just sort of about some of the abuses or things that you heard in your interviews that really troubled you.
Well, there is a lot. The fact that the medical care that the detainees receive at the facilities is inadequate. We had a case of a man at the Stewart Detention Center who died. Actually, in March 2009, Roberto Medina Martinez died and because of a treatable heart infection. And we actually have a lawsuit pending right now against the government for wrongful death. The physician who was in charge was systematically failing to review the medical examination information, And so not only was the health of Roberto Medina Martinez jeopardized, but the health of the entire detainee population. We also have situations where detainees with mental health issues are placed in segregation instead of being afforded the care that they need. And there's a story in the report pertaining to Mr. Hermes Calderon that I think is particularly illustrative of that.
And some of these things that you cite seem to be very basic. I mean, just food and hygiene products.
They are. I mean, you know, all we're asking for is that detainees be afforded basic human rights. And I should mention that the conditions that we documented, not only do they violate international human rights and constitutional standards, but also ICE's own standards for how these facilities should be operated. So it's particularly problematic.
Do you have any comparisons with other detention centers in the United States that were done in the study so that we could see how bad or good Georgia is in comparison?
The report contains a background section that gives you, some information about the detention picture nationally. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. Our study in particular, our findings are particular to the Georgia immigration detention centers. These are facilities that detain immigrants. Two of them, the Stewart Detention Center and the North Georgia Detention Center, detain immigrants only. The other two facilities also detain other prisoners.
Did you guys look at all to see if the conditions for the detainees, the immigrant detainees, were any different than the regular jail inmates?
Well, for one thing, conditions for immigrants in detention should not be punitive. And that is something that the Obama administration has promised, that there's going to be reforms to the immigration detention system such that it's civil detention rather than punitive detention. Because, the point of the detention, according to the government, is to ensure that immigrants show up to their hearings. And in fact, alternatives to detention, such as supervised release, have proved very effective in ensuring that that happens. So in a lot of situations, there is no reason for the immigrants to be detained and placed in detention in the first place. It's brought on behalf of the widow of Roberto Medina Martinez, and her name is Sarah Hernandez, against the U.S. government.
And that was filed here in Atlanta?
Yes. And if you email me, I can send you a copy of the complaint. Yeah.
Okay. What is it really about this situation that just you feel urges that action be taken?
Well, I mean, these violations are egregious. People's human rights are being violated. People are, being deprived of basic dignity. And we believe that the conditions of detention really run counter to the American values of justice and liberty, and that's something that we should all care about.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So